everyone, and welcome to class. Today we're going to talk about the new conservatism, and this is going to be basically from the time period of 1968 through 1988. So to start off with, we're going to talk about the Nixon administration. Nixon was elected president in 1968, and I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see the visual. So this is Richard Nixon right here, Richard Milhouse Nixon. And he comes to office bringing with him an extraordinarily loyal staff. Nixon, by nature, was a very reserved and remote personality, but he had been in Congress for a very long time, and so his experience and his service already to the country is what got him into the White House. But Nixon was willing to do or say anything to defeat his enemies. And those enemies would include political opponents, government bureaucracy, the press corps, even leaders of the anti-war protests. And so having this close circle of trusted advisors around him is going to benefit him. Some of these advisors are going to include H.R. Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, John Mitchell, also John Dean, as well as Henry Kissinger. And some of these are going to be loyal to the point of breaking the law. H.R. Haldeman is going to be his chief of staff. Ehrlichman is his chief domestic advisor. John Mitchell is going to be the attorney general. And then John Dean is going to be White House counsel. Henry Kissinger is his secretary, well, starts off being his national security advisor, and then will later on become Secretary of State. Now, while he is in office at the very beginning, he has to face unemployment and inflation and those kinds of issues. And so he is going to come in with a program called New Federalism. He's going to try and restore law and order. He is going to, do things like a 90-day price and wage freeze, where he's going to try and stabilize the economy. He's going to decrease the money supply somewhat. And he's going to do that by taking money out of circulation. The feds do that through the Federal Reserve Bank. He wants to increase interest rates. So what he's trying to do is cause what's known as deflation, or hard money. Money's going to be harder to come by. He's also going to take us off the gold standard and put us on a flexible exchange rate. So the dollar is going to rise and fall according to world demand. So like right now, the American dollar in comparison to the British pound, it takes about $1.34 of American money to gain a British pound. But back during this time period, it took $2 to be able to buy a British pound. About a year ago, for $1 you could get, I think, 14 Mexican pesos. Just the other day I was looking it up, and you can get almost 20 Mexican pesos for an American dollar today. So that's that flexible exchange rate. And then he's also going to appoint more conservative economists to the Federal Reserve Board, people that are going to be a little tighter with the money and not just throw it out there helter-skelter. Also during his time period is when the beginnings of the oil crisis is going to emerge. You have OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and they have a very tight control on gerrymandering, basically, the price of oil. And that's going to lead to issues in the mid-1970s. But he's also going to have to deal with the Great Society and the ramifications of trying to pay for things like the war on poverty, as well as pay for a major war over in Vietnam. And so this is going to increase not only money issues, but it's also going to increase federal control and the size of the U.S. government. And so one of his big things is to reduce the size of the U.S. government. So he wants to return more responsibility back to the states and less in the hands of the national government, and therefore that would cause the states to have to pay for it. And so with more control being in the hands of the states, any kind of federal money they would get to use for their programs, they'll have a freer ability to use that as they see fit. Now, yeah, there are certain parameters they have to stay within, but it's just trying to return control and power back to the states and less of it in the national government. Now, he's not going to be a real big proponent of civil rights because he's got a strong support out of the South, and he wants to maintain that. And so his Southern strategy is trying to be less in your face with civil rights. So he is not going to support the renewal of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He is not going to propose, or promote forced busing as far as to integrate schools. So he's not going to be a big proponent of civil rights because he's trying to protect his white power base that's in the South, the Southern Democrats. Now, as far as the Supreme Court goes, he's going to have a lot of influence. He is going to be able to appoint 4 new justices to the Supreme Court because he's going to have 4 that are either going to retire or pass away or resign while he is in office. And when you have vacancies open on the Supreme Court, then who's ever the president is going to appoint new justices that are similar in their viewpoint. So if it's a conservative president, he's going to appoint conservative judges. If it is a liberal president, they're going to propose or nominate liberal justices. And so he's going to be able to put 4 new justices on the Supreme Court. That's going to be Warren Burger, and John, I can't say Rehnquist very well. He's kind of, you know how you sometimes your mouth and your tongue don't work together. And he's also going to be able to appoint 2 others while he is in office. And then Berger is not going to be as conservative as the other 3. But it's during Nixon's presidency that the seeds of new conservatism that were planted in the late 50s, early 60s are really going to start spreading out. The title New Conservatism, that is a shift in the Republican Party in the 1960s through the 1980s to a more extreme right-wing philosophy that's going to show up in smaller government, traditional values, constitutionalism, states' rights, and a free market economy. And you can see some of that still today. You have a lot of members of Congress that don't always associate with one party or the other, but they're real strong constitutionalists. They want us to go by the Constitution, strict interpretation of the Constitution, very much like Jefferson was back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And so you're going to have people emerge like Barry Goldwater, Milton Friedman, and Ronald Reagan that are part of this new move towards a more conservative type of government. Also during this time, you have got a big push when it comes to the environment. The EPA is going to be established, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, and they're going to be overseeing air, clean air, clean water. This is when we're going to get signs like "Don't mess with Texas," "Don't be a litter bug," things like that. And so it's going to be driven by some instances that come out during this time period. So you see this picture right here. It says Love Canal. This was the canal that was built up in Buffalo, New York, and it never got finished. And so the industries in Buffalo started dumping all their sludge off into this canal, and it became a toxic mess. And so, okay, we're going to clean this up. And they fill it up with dirt, and they build a school on top of it, and then wonder why the kids are getting sick. And so this becomes this huge scandal. And so environmentalists start looking at better ways to clean up the air and the water, looking at things that we're consuming that might not be good for our health. And so this is when DDT gets banned. It was a insecticide that got crop dusted over all the crops to kill off the bugs. And it's a great thing to kill off the bugs, but it also was a carcinogen, so it could cause cancer. Much like Roundup today, when they found that if you get too high an exposure to Roundup, that it can be bad for your health. And so there's going to be a very intense look at the different things that are affecting our environment. This is when we're going to start reducing reliance on nuclear power plants, and when we're going to look at saving endangered species. On the other hand, you also have a big push on protecting the consumer. And this guy right here, Ralph Nader, I think he ran for president. I've lost count how many times he's run for president. Always runs it as an independent. But the thing that I remember him by is the Timex watch commercial. The big campaign slogan back in the day was, "It takes a licking and it keeps on ticking." And he was the one who did that commercial. But Ralph Nader has always been a big proponent of protecting the consumer. This is when magazines like Consumer Reports become very, very popular. This is when we're starting looking at how to make things safer for the consumer. My very first car, I had to put the seatbelts in. It didn't come with seatbelts. And so they moved into putting seatbelts in. And the big commercial was, buckle up for safety, buckle up for safety, always buckle up. And they're looking at ways to make the consumer safer from some of the products that we buy. Now, it's become rather idiotic at times when they have to tell you not to put an electric appliance in the water. I've never been prone to want to, dry my hair while I'm in the shower, but there's a warning that says, do not use this product in the shower, and that's a hair dryer. And so it's all those kinds of things. But they're demanding honesty and accountability from industry and from the government is what they're doing. Now, like I said a minute ago, in 1974, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, the Arab countries, so that's all your Arab oil countries, your Middle Eastern oil companies, and Venezuela are all part of OPEC. And they decide it might be a wise thing just to turn off the tap. Now, we don't understand that at the point. That's not what the news media told us. We were all afraid that we were running out of oil and we were all going to run out of gas. And so there's this huge gas shortage. And so lines were ridiculously long. So in this picture here, that's a gas line. That's not a traffic problem. That's people waiting in line to get gas. You are only allowed to get 10 gallons at a time. This is when these econo cars like this became very, very popular. And it almost crashed the American car industry because American cars were going, oh, this will just pass. It'll be fine. And this is when Honda and Subaru and Toyota got their foot in the door in the American car market because they made cars that were smaller and more fuel efficient. And it took a while for the American car industry to catch up because they were used to building these land yachts. I mean, you could watch the gas needle move as you put the foot on the gas. But it's also going to be the end of the full service gas station. When I first started driving, I could pull up to the pump. A nice gentleman would come and ask me how much gas I wanted. He would pump my gas, fill up my tires, check my oil, and clean my windshield, all for the same low price. It was like 35 cents a gallon at the time. Gas prices are going to triple because of this gas shortage. So yeah, you're thinking, oh, I would love for gas to be $1 a gallon. That'd be awesome. But back in this time period, that was as much a hit on the American pocketbook as when it goes from $1.50 to $4 a gallon today. And so the full service gas station is going to go away. And that's why we all get to pump our own gas now and put our own air in our tires and all that bit. Now they're even charging for air, which I find very annoying. We all breathe air, but they're going to make you pay 75 cents to put air in your tires. Unless you go to QT. QT doesn't charge for air. And so the energy crisis is going to last for a while. We finally get past it, and it fades off into the past until we hit a news reporter about a year ago that decided that, well, if we're not careful, we're not going to have enough oil and enough gasoline for Labor Day. And once again, we had cars 4 and 5 deep at the gas station trying to get, gas for their cars for the Labor Day weekend. Now, foreign policy under Nixon is going to take a different tact. I'm going to change my slides here. This guy right here, this is Henry Kissinger, and he is probably still the premier foreign policy person that we've ever had. And he understood how to deal with the Soviets and with the Chinese. And they're going to bring in this policy called détente. Détente is an easing of tensions. We are going to stop poking the bear and seeing what kind of reaction that we could get out of it. We're going to back off and, stop getting each other's faces. In 1972, Nixon is going to visit Communist China. He's the first president to ever visit China. He had always dreamed of walking the Great Wall, so here he is with his white hat, walking the Great Wall. And we're going to come down with an agreement with the Chinese, who are also communist. This is when we start recognizing Communist China as the official government of China instead of the nationalist Chinese in exile over in Taiwan. And we're going to do that and that easing of tensions by using the game of ping pong. And that's what this cartoon is all about. It was known as ping pong diplomacy. And it's a activity that both countries enjoy. And it takes our focus off of what's irritating us and puts our focus on something that we both like. It's kind of like when you and your parents or your significant other get into this knockdown, drag out fight. You're so furious with each other that you can no longer speak, and you both just cross your arms and plop down on the couch, and you're staring at the TV set, and you're just kind of staring at it. And your favorite TV show's on, your favorite sitcom. And you start watching. And the more you watch, the more you get into the show, and less angry you are. And the same has happened with the other person. And all of a sudden you find yourselves laughing at the same thing. And by the time the TV show's over, you're both calmed down enough to where y'all can go back to talking about it instead of yelling about it. And the problem's still there, but now you can talk to each other in civil tones. That's what ping pong diplomacy is going to do for us in Chinese. It's going to get us back to talking to each other instead of screaming at each other. Because adults are just like kids. If you scream at them, they're not going to listen. Adults do the same thing. You scream at me, and my ears close and my eyes glaze over, and I no longer listen to you. If you can talk to me in civil tones and give me solid arguments why I should see it a different way, then I'm more willing to listen. And that's what ping pong diplomacy is going to do during the Nixon administration. He's also going to go over and visit Moscow and sit down with Brezhnev. By the time we get to Nixon, Brezhnev is now the premier. He's the one you can recognize. He's got these big old bushy eyebrows, so he's got two giant caterpillars on above each eye. And this is when they're going to sign the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, which was the first of these treaties where we're going to start limiting how many nuclear weapons each country can have. Now, we're not dismantling any of them yet. That comes later. But at this time, we're going to say, okay, we can only have this much on either side. It's going to put a damper on the nuclear arms race. If you think about it, say that you got this neighbor, and you and your neighbor, y'all know each other, but you're not really best friends or anything. You're not really sure you like this other person. But you know that they've got a small arsenal in their house. And so in thinking about them and what they've got, you may start going and picking up different weapons here and there. And so it becomes this arms race, this weapons race. That's what was happening with different countries that didn't know they found out that this country had more weapons, so they're going to get more weapons, and I'll get more weapons, and I'll get more weapons. And so with this SALT I, they're going to say, okay, that's enough. Let's stop this competition over who can have the biggest and baddest weapons. And so that's what SALT I is going to do. Now, Kissinger comes into play because he uses a tactic called realpolitik. When he sits down and talks to these other countries, he's starting to propose things that the United States is really willing to do instead of this pie in the sky, we're going to promise you everything and do nothing type of attitude. And so that's what realpolitik is, and it's spelled with a K because it was mostly used with the Russians. If you've ever seen Russian, you know that it's got a lot of consonants in it. And so that's why it's spelled that way. He also knew that the Soviets and the Chinese didn't like each other. Just because they were both communists doesn't mean that they trusted one another. They had had a falling out a few years before, and from that point on, they didn't trust each other. And so he's going to use that as a wedge to drive the United States in between the two. He's going to play both ends against the middle, much like you've seen kids do when they have parents that are divorced and divorced parents are not getting along. Those kids can get just about anything they want because they play both parents against each other. And so that's what Henry Kissinger is going to do between the Chinese and the Soviets. Now, Nixon gets into office. One of his big campaign promises is that he was going to get us out of Vietnam. And he's going to do it in a backdoor type of fashion. He's trying to appease both the Doves and the Hawks. The Doves are the people who want us to end the war right now. They're led by Fulbright, who I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Fulbright Scholarship is named after that guy. But they wanted peace right now, just get us out of there. And then you have the Hawks, who might want us to get out, but don't want us to get out without us looking like it was an American victory. And so it's going to cause Nixon to do things differently instead of just stop doing one way or the other right out in the open. He also has to deal with the silent majority. That is the mainstream Americans the people that voted for him who want law and order. They're tired of all of the protests and all of the conflict going back and forth in this country about the war. And so in 1970, he is going to support a, first off, covert, so nobody knew about it, later overt invasion of Cambodia. Now, right through here is Vietnam, and there is a line, a trail that goes from here down into here. It's called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was the supply line that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong were using to supply the South. But it was running through Laos and Cambodia. And so that's why he's going to authorize this invasion of Cambodia in 1970. Well, when the press find out about it over here, it gets splashed all over the news, and protests go across the entire country. They're all really upset about that. And so, especially on college campuses. And so that's going to lead to this Kent State fiasco. Kent State is a university up in Ohio, and the students on campus had set fire to the ROTC building, had taken control of all the other administration buildings, mass protests and stuff, until finally the National Guard is sent in. Now, the National Guard at this time are 18, 19, 20-year-old guys, and they have weapons, but they are being screamed at by these kids. They're having things thrown at them. They are being called, bad names and stuff. And so all it takes is one of them to lose control, and that's what happens. One loses control, and shots open up, and you're going to have 4 killed and 9 wounded in the Kent State shootings. It's going to be a really, really, really bad thing for the Nixon administration. In 1973, they're finally going to get the Paris Peace Accord signed, and that's going to end the war in Vietnam. And then by 1975, the North has overrun the South in Vietnam. It is all one country, and it's communist. And so you're going to have a huge, huge group of South Vietnamese that are going to flee the country. This is when you're going to get the Vietnamese boat people. Now, I was a kid during this time period, and we just kind of halfway listened to the news just like kids do today. And most of us thought that the boat people were coming across the Pacific in these dingy little boats that were full to overflowing. Okay? Now, it's not really happened. They would go around to Malaysia or down to Australia or wherever, and then fly over to America. Vietnamese have got to have a sponsor in this country to be able to immigrate into America. But this is when we're going to get that third big wave of immigration, where we have a lot of people coming from Southeast Asia into America. And then, as I hinted about in last lecture, we have got new weapons that come out during Vietnam. This is another picture of napalm. If you've seen the movie Forrest Gump, when Forrest is running out of the jungle with Bubba in his arms, and the jungle behind him explodes, they had dropped napalm. And then this is what it looked like to drop Agent Orange. Now, Agent Orange was the one that causes the health effects. It was supposed to kill off the jungle, as far as the leaves and the grass and the trees and what have you, but it also brought with it health effects that the government is not going to acknowledge until much later. But they do finally acknowledge that it was a problem. The other big thing of the Nixon administration that everybody knows about is the Watergate scandal. Now, this is the Watergate building right here. Watergate in Washington, D.C. was a hotel and office buildings all associated together. And in one of these office buildings was the headquarters of the Democratic National Convention. Okay, it's coming up on the 1972 election. Nixon is a Republican. And so, that very close circle of friends I was telling you about earlier? Well, they are trying to make sure that he gets reelected. And so they want to put in listening devices into the Democratic National Headquarters to find out what the game plan is going to be for the upcoming campaign. And it was a fiasco from the very beginning. The first time they try to break in, they don't even get in the building. And the second time, they all get caught. Right. Now, Nixon did not have anything to do with the break-in, with the burglary. But he was all over the cover-up. And that's what's going to get him into trouble. Okay. He is going when he first finds out about it, he is going to authorize the CIA to persuade the FBI to stop the investigation, claiming national security and executive privilege. And he's going to try and bribe the Watergate defendants into silence. And so all this is going to kind of stay under the surface during the 1972 campaign, and he's going to get reelected. The trial doesn't start until the early part of 1973, and this is when everything breaks loose. They're on trial in front of a guy named Judge John J. Sirica, and he is not convinced that they're telling him everything that there is to be told. And so he is going to sentence these guys. They're all found guilty, and he's going to sentence them to very long prison terms, hoping that that will get them to plead and to fess up. Well, these two guys right here also don't believe the whole story's been told. These are the guys from the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. And they find out that there is more to the story, and it gets brought up in front of the Senate. And so the Senate is going to open an investigation. It's the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities, and it's led by Sam Ervin. And it comes out in these hearings that President Nixon has been recording all of his phone conversations because he's going to want to write a book. Okay. And so the Senate wants to hear these tapes, and he's going, nope, this executive privilege. You don't get to hear my tapes. And they want them, and they want them. And so they're going to appoint a special prosecutor named Archibald Cox. And he is going to pester the president into, giving up these tapes. And so Nixon finally is going to hand over edited transcripts. Now, this is where someone has written out what's on the tapes. And that's not what the Senate wants. And so they keep harassing him to the point where we get to what's known as the Saturday Night Massacre. Nixon is going to fire Archibald Cox. And because of that, there's going to be several other people who are going to resign. Others are going to get fired as well. And this is known as the Saturday Night Massacre. Leon Jaworski is appointed to replace Archibald Cox as special prosecutor, but he too says, Nixon, turn over the tapes. And so the House Judiciary Committee is going to start impeachment proceedings, and the Supreme Court is going to order Nixon to turn over the tapes. And so he finally is going to, turn over the tapes, but he's going to go, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. My inept secretary accidentally erased 18 minutes off these tapes. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do with her, But he hands over the tapes finally, but there was still enough evidence on there to show that Nixon had been part of the cover-up. And so in August of 1974, Nixon is going to resign as president. He is going to be the first president that we've ever had, and the only president we've had, to resign from the office of president. And Gerald Ford is going to step up and become the next president. Now, Gerald Ford is interesting because he's the only president we've ever had that has never been elected to either office. He was not elected to vice president, nor was he elected to president. What happens is back in the late 1972, during the campaign, or early 1973, Vice President Spiro Agnew had to resign because he was under investigation for tax evasion and embezzlement. And so he's going to resign. And so President Nixon, as he can, will appoint or nominate Gerald Ford to be his vice president. He'll get approved by the Senate, and that's how Gerald Ford becomes vice president. And then when Nixon later resigns, then that's how Gerald Ford becomes president. And that's how that situation got him into that spot. But he is going to sabotage his political career within 30 days. Because he is going to pardon Nixon of all crimes and misdemeanors in association with the Watergate scandal. Now, this is not because he thought that Nixon was innocent of all this. He was trying to save the country from having to go through this long, drawn-out trial of a president. He thought that it would deteriorate the image of the office of president. And so that's why he did it. And yes, he knew he was sabotaging his career. He will run again in the 1976 election against Jimmy Carter, but Carter will win in 1976. So this is Gerald Ford. While he's in office, his big domestic policy was called WIN, whip inflation now, because we still have, out of control inflation. He also is going to sign the Helsinki Accords. That's really the only big foreign policy thing that's going to happen while he's in office. And then in 1976, Jimmy Carter is going to be elected president. Now, he is from Georgia. He had been the governor of Georgia. He had also been a peanut farmer. He is going to have a brother named Billy Carter, who is going to make Jimmy roll his eyes and duck his head, because Billy is going to play on the fact that his brother is now president and try to make money off of it with something called Billy Beer. But Jimmy Carter, as president, he is going to step into stagflation. Stagflation is when you've got really high inflation and really high unemployment. And so your economy is stuck and not going anywhere. He is going to, this is going to be caused by several things besides unemployment and inflation. You've also got a lot of government spending. You've got the price of gasoline has gone out the roof. Interest rates. In 1979, the interest rate, the mortgage interest rate to buy a new house was like 17 and 18%. Right now, it's like at 4%. So it was extraordinarily hard to get a house. And all this was based off, you're trying to balance the spending on domestic things as well as foreign things. And so there's just not that much money. The taxpayer only has so much. That's some of the concern right now with all of the stimulus packages that have been passed by Congress is where are they getting all of this money? Because the taxpayer only has so much. And so there's this fear that taxes are going to go up. So Carter is going to move towards deregulating things like energy and railroads and trucking, airlines, trying to cause competition so that prices will go down. If you'll notice, you look at a gas station that is off by itself, and then down the road, you've got a couple of gas stations that are side by side. The prices at the ones that are side by side are usually cheaper because they have to compete with each other. Whereas this one out here all by itself has no competition, and so their prices are usually higher. And that's why that works that way. He's also going to have issues with trying to create new cabinet positions like the Department of Energy, trying to regulate the out-of-control use of water and electricity, how to come up with new power sources. This is when in all government buildings in the summertime, the temperature was set at 80. And in the winter, it was set like at 67, 68. So really hot buildings in the summer and really cold buildings in the winter. And so they start looking at these alternate sources of energy. And nuclear power is probably the most efficient and the least costly of all forms of energy that we can come up with, even the most reliable. Except that when you've got a nuclear power plant, you have to watch everything very, very carefully. Because when it fails catastrophically. So this island right here, this is 3 Mile Island. This is a nuclear reactor. This one, I think it was one of these. That one's got steam cut, so it's probably one of these over here. It had a partial meltdown. And so they shut the thing down, they fill it with concrete, and it's never been used again. Much different than the Chernobyl accident that happens over in Ukraine in the mid-1980s. But everybody becomes a little more cautious about using nuclear power. My son ran a nuclear reactor on a submarine, so he had to go through the Navy's nuclear power school. And they are very, very persnickety about what these guys do. Everybody in class has to do well. If 1 or 2 people don't do well, everybody has to do extra study time and extra tutoring because these 2 over here didn't do well. So it makes them all responsible for each other. It's kind of like if everybody in this class got the same grade and you got the lowest grade in the class instead of the highest grade in the class, you guys would all be really, really intense on making sure that everybody did well so that your grade would be better. Same type of thing with nuclear reactor. They have to make sure that everybody is watching everybody else because if one person falls down, everybody else can suffer for it. And so that's why they're that way in nuclear power. Foreign policy, the big cornerstone of the Carter administration is going to be this right here, the Camp David Accords. He's going to get Anwar Sadat of Egypt and Menachem Begin of Israel to come together and agree to stop killing each other. They've been doing it for years over the Sinai Peninsula. and they're going to sign the Camp David Accords, and I don't think they fought at each other since then. And that was back in 1977, 78. But in Afghanistan, you're going to have the Soviets that are going to invade Afghanistan. Afghanistan has always been a crossroads. It's always been coveted by other countries to have control of it because it is a crossroads. And so the Soviet Union is going to invade Afghanistan. In response to that, we are going to boycott the Summer Olympics that were to be held in Moscow that year. We are also going to cut off grain shipments to the Soviet Union. Now, I was a kid at the time this going on. I was, in my late teens. I couldn't understand, still can't really understand, how a country that large can't feed itself. But they couldn't. They were getting grain from us. And so that's how we are going to respond to the invasion of Afghanistan. But we're also going to give aid to somebody who's over in Afghanistan who's helping the Afghanis against the Soviets, and that is Osama bin Laden. Yes, the same one who was behind the terrorist attack of 9/11. He didn't always hate Americans. That doesn't happen until the first Gulf War that he turns against America. You also, during Carter's administration, have got the Iranian hostage crisis. The Shah of Iran had been overthrown and replaced with the Ayatollah Khomeini. He had left the country with his family. He was in exile, I think it's somewhere in Argentina or in South America. But he had already been friends with Carter. And the Shah is suffering from cancer. In fact, he's dying from cancer. And so Carter allows the Shah into America to seek medical treatments. And students in Iran find out about this, and these are college students, and they storm the American embassy in Tehran and take it over. And take Americans inside the embassy hostage for over a year, for 444 days. And Carter tries diplomatic means trying to get them released. It doesn't work. Terrorists usually are not people that like to sit down at the table and talk to you. They're more interested in action. He does try and send a rescue mission, but the helicopters crash in a sandstorm in the desert. One of the girls I graduated from high school was in on that mission, and she died in the desert. But they are released as soon as Ronald Reagan takes office, and I'll come into why that happens. But all that's going to make Carter look like a spineless, do-nothing type of president. He's also going to sign the Panama Canal Treaty while he's in office, and that's not going to help his image any, because what he's going to do is sign over control to the Panamanians for the canal, and that's going to turn over to them in 1999. This is in 1979. 20 years in the future, we're going to give the Panama Canal over to the Panamanians. And at the time, everybody thought, oh, that's going to be a bad thing. They're not going to be able to run that thing the same way Americans have. It's not going to stay open and la, la, la. But it hasn't been a bad thing. They got control of it in 1999, and it's been perfectly fine ever since. They have maintained it. It's been open to everybody going back and forth. There hasn't ever been a slowdown with the Panama Canal. Now, also in this time period, this new conservatism is going to bump it up a notch. And you have religion that's going to step out of its background scene and take a forward stand. So the moral majority is going to show up. It's going to show up in things like the 700 Club, the PTL Club, Tammy Faye Baker and Jim Baker, and it is a rise in religious fundamentalism. Jerry Falwell will be the leading face in this. He is I wanted to say he is a Baptist preacher, but he was also somewhat of a comedian during this time, and so he gets to be the face of this new rise in religion that's going to sweep over the country in the 1980s. The women's movement is going to really be pushing the Equal Rights Amendment, but you're going to have a lot of pushback by conservative women. By the time we get into the 1980s, you have got women who now no longer have a choice. They have to work instead of getting to stay home and be stay-at-home moms like they would like to be. And so they're going to push back against the ERA. So now you have this conflict back and forth within the women's movement. The whole bit over abortion is going to rise up, and the right to life and pro-choice and pro-life, and all that's going to really come to the forefront during this rise of extreme conservatism. And then in 1980, this guy right here gets elected president. Now, this is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan starts off as a movie star in California. He is known for being in B-rated westerns. He will become president of the Screen Actors Guild, and then he'll later become governor of California. And he gets a lot of accolades because he's going to straighten up the welfare system in California and fix their economic issues. And so when it comes to the 1980 election, he's got a lot of positive support behind him. Of course, you have Carter, on the other hand, who now has the Iranian hostage crisis and the economy problems and people being really angry with government and with how liberal the country is. And so that is going to sweep Reagan into office. He's also going to be supported by a group called Reagan Democrats. People like my parents who had been long-term Democrats. I mean, they were voting party line Democrats, what they would call yellow dog Democrats. And by the time we get to 1980, this is when my parents basically become Republicans, because that they don't like the direction the Democrats party is going, and so they're going to switch over to being Republicans. And so Reagan comes into office, and he's going to bring with him something called Reaganomics, also known as supply side economics. And that's when you have broad tax cuts and deregulation on business to allow the economy to expand and contract based off supply and demand. And that if you apply it to the top, it'll trickle down to the rest. So it's also known as trickle-down economics. So you're going to cut taxes on factories so they can expand. When the factories expand, then they can create jobs and they can pay their workers more. When people have more money in their pocket, then they spend it or they save it. So that's going to help the banks. It's also going to help the retailers who are going to be making more money. And so that's how supply side economics works. And that's what these four pillars are right here. Now, this picture right here, I told you I'd come back to this. The day that he takes the oath of office, these guys get let go. These are the hostages that are let go from Iran. And the reason they get let go is because the students in Iran, the only thing they know about Ronald Reagan is that he is cowboy, and their image of cowboys are gunslingers. And so while they knew they could probably push Carter around, they're afraid that Reagan is going to turn their country into glass. And what that means is if you drop nuclear weapons on sand, that kind of heat turns sand into glass. And so they were afraid that they weren't going to be able to get away with hanging on to these hostages any longer. So as soon as Reagan takes office, the hostages get released. And that's where that comes from. Reagan's foreign policy, he is going to take a really, really hard stand against the Soviet Union. He's going to stand right up there and call them the evil empire. In 1983, scientists come out with what's known as the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI. And this gets presented to the public about the same time as Return of the Jedi is hitting the theaters. And so that's why it gets nicknamed Star Wars. And it was a satellite from space that was going to be capable of using lasers to knock down incoming missiles from the Soviet Union. So that's going to give us an upper hand in this nuclear arms race, that we can knock their weapons down and they can't do anything to ours. Now, did we ever really develop this weapon? I don't think so. But the Soviets didn't know that. In 1984, this guy right here gets elected. This is Mikhail Gorbachev. He gets made the premier of the Soviet Union. You can always tell which one he is because he is the one that has what looks like a map of Europe right here on his forehead. It is his birthmark. But it looks kind of like a map of Europe. So that's Mikhail Gorbachev. And he is going to introduce to the Soviet Union two new things. It's called Glasnost and Perestroika. Now keep in mind, Mikhail Gorbachev had grown up in the Soviet Union, always being a communist country. And he had watched his country slowly deteriorate to where it was at the point he takes over, where people were having to wait in long lines to spend extraordinary amounts of money to buy a loaf of bread. The economy was shot. And so by introducing perestroika and glasnost, perestroika is a more democratic government where people are going to have more of a say in who gets elected and who gets chosen for leader. And then glasnost is openness. People can start talking about the government without being afraid they're going to get thrown into some cold prison in Siberia. Okay? And so it's going to give this country a little more freedom. And then on top of that, these two guys get to know each other and they become friends. Now, do they see everything eye to eye? No. But do you and your best friends always see everything the same way? So they're going to become good friends. Their wives are going to become good friends. And that's going to give an easier method of communicating and ease a lot of the built up tension that's based off of the unknown. A lot of times people are afraid of each other because they don't know about each other. And if they would just stop and take a minute and get to know one another, then it would be a whole lot better. And so they're going to sign the INF Treaty. And this is when we're going to start dismantling and taking out missiles in Europe that are aimed at each other. And so a lot of the tension is going to ease off. You also have got Poland. This guy right here is Lech Walesa. And Solidarity was the name of the labor union, and they are going to throw off the control of Moscow on their country and stand alone and not be controlled as a satellite nation from by Moscow. But a downturn in Reagan's administration is going to be the Iran-Contra affair. They find out that weapons are being sold to Iran, and the proceeds are being used to support the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Support the Contras in Nicaragua against the Sandinistas. The Sandinistas were a Soviet-Cuban-backed group in Nicaragua that was trying to take control. And so they're trying to pin this on Reagan. And so there's all these conversations, and as hard as I tried, Reagan just stands up right there and says, I had nothing to do with this. I don't know what they're doing. They did not get permission from me to do this. So you investigate all you want to, but I had nothing to do with it. So instead of trying to cover it up, he just opens the door. And they find out that it was Oliver North who was behind it. He was a colonel at the time. And he will stand right there and say, nope, I did not do this with the permission of the president. Things that we find out about President Reagan because of the hearings on this was that he liked jelly beans and that sometimes he would sleep in cabinet meetings. But they never could pin any kind of foreknowledge onto the Reagan administration. And so Reagan didn't get into any trouble. I think Oliver North spent several years in prison, but he's out now. Now, at the end of this, I also want to talk about the demographic changes that are going to happen during this time period. You're going to have a lot of people from up in here that are going to move down over here. This is the Rust Belt. This is the Sun Belt. Starting in the late 70s and into the 80s, a lot of the steel mills and the coal mines are all going to shut down. And people are going to lose their jobs up here, and they're going to move south looking for the jobs. And so this is going to cause a lot of shifting, not just in population numbers, but in voting emphasis. Because as these states gain in population, they're going to gain in numbers of representatives in the House of Representatives. And these states up here are going to lose. It's going to also change electoral college emphasis when it comes to presidents. And so that's why it's important to understand the demographic changes and how they're going from the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt. You also got this significant increase in people coming from outside the country. So the third wave of immigration, they're coming from Southeast Asia, but they're also coming up from Central and South America. All the way up until the mid-1970s, if someone was coming from south of the border, or their heritage was south of the border, they were known as Mexican Americans, because that's where most everybody came from, unless they were Puerto Rican. But with the mid-1970s, now you have them coming from Nicaragua and Honduras and Ecuador, Brazil, all those places, Argentina. And so that's when we start changing it to being Hispanic or Latino instead of just being Mexican American. And then you also have got the aging population. Here's a map for you for the immigration patterns of where they're coming. But this is your aging population. So your baby boomers, by the time we get into the 1980s, mid-1980s, are getting up here to retirement age. And if you were to look at an actual population pyramid, they're called a pyramid because they're supposed to look like a pyramid. Well, today it looks more like a mushroom cloud because your aging population is so huge, and that's when you're having concerns over the solvency of Social Security. You have too many people hitting Social Security at the same time, and there may not be enough money. I'm not sure if I have spoken of this before when I was talking about the Great Depression, but it's worth talking about again. When I'm talking about solvency in this case, I'm talking about whether it is financially stable. So solvency in economics is different than solvency in science. So when we're talking about money, we're talking about whether or not it's financially stable. And so that brings us up to the 21st century. And so next class, we'll talk about how we get into the 21st century. Until then, y'all have a great day. Thanks. Bye.